She was hanged in black robes inside a Civil War fortress. Her ghost chased soldiers from their posts, left footprints in the snow that started and ended nowhere, and got men court-martialed for firing in thin air. There's just one problem. She may never have existed. So who is the lady in black? And if she's not real, what are people seeing out there? History remembers the facts, but what about the phantoms that refuse to be forgotten? Welcome to the Darkness Files. I'm Jeremy, the Common Historian. Today we're going to Boston Harbor, to a Civil War fortress on a granite island, where one of New England's most enduring ghost stories was born, grew, and then got picked apart by historians. And somehow, it's only got stranger. Fort Warren on George's Island in Boston Harbor, was one of the strongest fortifications constructed to defend the capital of Massachusetts. Commenced in 1833, construction of the huge pentagonal fort was completed in 1861, just before the start of the Civil War. The massive structure, composed of stone and granite, was constructed as part of a broader network of coastal defenses. It served as a training facility for Union soldiers and functioned as a prison for Confederate officers and government officials during the Civil War. The fort had held a number of high-ranking civilians, including Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens and Confederate Postmaster General John Reagan. It was an isolated, wind-battered island, cold, dark, the kind of place where the imagination runs freely, especially on the winter watch. And that matters, because during the winter, Union soldiers had purportedly seen mysterious shadows when patrolling the lonely beaches of the island, and such occurrences are likely what led to the modern ghost story. In fact, an order was actually posted at the guardhouse, denouncing several punishments in any case where ghosts were allowed to pass a beat without challenge and arrest. That order is real. It's documented. The island was doing something to people's minds long before anyone named Melanie Lanier entered the picture. Here is the story as it's been told for generations. In early 1862, a Southern woman named Melanie Lanier, whose husband was a Confederate officer imprisoned at the fort, made a reckless attempt to free her newlywed husband. After she heard he had been captured, she secured passage on a ship bound for Hull, Massachusetts, where she stayed at the home of a Confederate sympathizer. Hull is only about a mile away from George's Island. She systematically observed the fort with a spyglass, and on a stormy night in January 1862, rowed across to George's Island. She cut her hair short, dressed as a man, and brought with her an old pistol and a small pickaxe. She made her way to the dungeon cells, and from outside the fort, signaled to her husband by whistling an obscure southern tune, to which he signaled back. She squeezed through the slit window of his cell and was hidden by the Confederate soldiers. The plan was bold, almost impossible. They planned not merely to escape from the fort, but to capture it entirely, to turn the guns of Fort Warren against Boston and potentially change the course of the war. However, their plans were foiled when they dug too close to the stone wall and were heard by the Union soldiers. As the Federal troops came upon them, Mrs. Lanier pointed her gun, but one of the men gained control of it. In the melee, the pistol accidentally went off, killing her husband. The rescue attempt had ended in the worst possible way. She had come to save her husband. She had killed him instead. Lanier was sentenced to death as a spy. Her last wish was to be hung in a dress, and somehow a black one was found for her, part of a costume kept at the fort for theatrical performances. After her death, many soldiers claimed to have seen the mysterious apparition of a lady in black, and her voice was heard in the corridors of the dungeon. Some soldiers were even court-martialed for shooting at a phantom in black. One was brought up on charges for fleeing his post because he claimed he was chased by the lady in black. Footsteps that come from nowhere and go nowhere were found in the snow. Stones were observed rolling across rooms, seemingly on their own accord. It's a remarkable story. Devoted wife, impossible mission, tragic accident, execution, haunting. There's just one problem. The origins of Mrs. Lanier's tale can be traced to an author and historian, Edward Rowe Snow, who wrote about the Lady in Black in his book, The Romance of Boston Bay, published in 1944. Snow himself stated it was a work of fiction, a piecing together of several different local legends. Snow was a prolific author of books on New England maritime history and folklore. He used to lead tour groups through the fort, telling the story, complete with costume accomplices who would leap out and frighten tour-goers. And when historians went looking for Melanie Lanier in the historical records, they found nothing. After scouring newspaper publishings during the war, there is no mention of a woman executed at Fort Warren. An event like that, a Confederate woman hanged as a spy inside a Union prison, would have been front-page news across the country. There's no record, no death notice, no military report, no name in the rolls. Snow hadn't even given his ill-fated lovers names in the original telling. The heroine is now often called Melanie. The officer's surname has become Lanier. Borrowed, it appears from the name of an actual enlisted soldier from North Carolina who died of illness at Fort Warren during roughly the same period. So the name is borrowed, the story is folklore, and the woman herself almost certainly never existed. There's another theory worth mentioning that after World War II, when the U.S. government was selling off its military possessions and Fort Warren was on the list, Snow may have leaned into the Lady in Black legend, specifically to make the island seem too culturally significant to demolish. Whether that was his intent or a fortunate side effect, it worked. Fort Warren is now part of the National Park Service and is open to the public. A ghost story may have literally saved a piece of American history. Here's where it gets generally interesting, because debunking Melanie Lanier is the easy part. The harder question is this: if she never existed, what explained the reports that were kept coming? Not just in the 1860s, not just in folklore, but well into the 20th century. Reputable authorities, police, researchers from MIT, and Army personnel have reported encounters at Fort Warren within the last 40 years or so. Soldiers court-martialed for chasing phantoms, footprints in snow with no origin, no destination, stones rolling on their own, voices in the corridor of the dungeons. These aren't campfire embellishments. Some are documented in military records. One folklorist who studied the legend noted that the hauntings seem deeply tied to the literal and physical history of the island, a prison with heavily militaristic history that has a great deal of death associated with it. And that's the thing about Fort Warren. Even if Melanie Lanier is fiction, the fort has held real prisoners who suffered real deaths on that cold, isolated island. Confederate Vice President Alexander Stevens was held there. Soldiers died of illness. Real men were buried in the granite ground. The woman in black as a supernatural archetype is not unique to Fort Warren either. In Appalachian folklore, a woman in black was a supernatural figure appearing in various regions throughout the southern United States in the early to mid 1900s. A figure said to appear to men who had misbehaved or committed some moral transgression. She was a recurring figure in American folklore long before Edward Rowe Snow put a pen to the paper. She was was the Lady in Black a story invented to explain something people were already experiencing? Or did Snow's tale give a name and a face to a presence that has always been there? Fort Warren still stands on George's Island in Boston Harbor. You can take a ferry there today and walk the corridors of the dungeons yourself. There's even a self-guided Lady in Black tour, and every year visitors report something: a chill in the corridor, a sound with no source, a shadow at the edge of the room. Melanie Lanier almost certainly never lived, but whatever has been seen, heard, and documented at Fort Warren for over 150 years, that part doesn't go away just because you debunk the story attached to it. And that may be the most unsettling thought of all, because if it's not her, then what is it? I'm Jeremy, the Common Historian. The past may be gone, but spirits live on. Thank you for joining me on this haunted history adventure. Until next time, keep digging into the darkness.